He was interviewing Bernie Ecclestone while still at university. Now, he catches up with all the drivers at every single race. He's worked at the BBC, Autosport, and is now senior writer for Formula One. Today, we're in the Grandstand with Lawrence Barretto.
On more serious notes, I do want to talk a little bit about the feeder series joining F1. Do you think that when they're there, they enhance the weekend, when they're around the paddock, seeing the drivers, seeing the teams go there?
Definitely. I know that, so in non-COVID times, when we could go into motorhomes, you'd often find a lot of people actually in McLaren on their ground level bit. They're having a coffee watching the F2. It was kind of a thing where people got together to watch the race. I know a lot of the F1 drivers would watch it, maybe just to see how the first corner goes, for example. And they're generally interested in racing anyway. And I think people who are at a Grand Prix love racing, and it's useful to have the feeder series there, because the ideal is that obviously drivers in those formulae will make it into Formula One at some stage, just like Mick, Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin, for example, are doing it this year. And it's great, for example, that we've got the W Series this year. So it's another kind of different type of series on the bill. I think it's great. I think it's really good. I think it's important that if you can pack the schedule with really good racing, you've got a better chance of, keeping the current fans happy and hopefully enticing some more in.
Very excited to see the W Series join the support bill as well this year. But sticking on the graduation theme at the moment, you mentioned there you've got Nikita Mazepin, Mick Schumacher and Yuki Tsunoda graduating into Formula One this year. Tsunoda is likely the only one who'll be scoring points regularly. So how do you see Haas, or generally, how do you see the graduates when they go for their rookie season? How do you compare them equally in times where Alex Albon had much more opportunity to score points than George Russell, for example?
The simple answer is you can't compare them. When George, Alex and Lando came up, they were all in very different cars and so had very different opportunities. And Alex has lost his seat and has scored 2 podiums, and George has only scored a point once, and not even with Williams. So, and yet he's still in the sport. So it's not fair to compare them in that sense. You can only just look at what they do with what they have. And so, George and what he's done at Williams, and from what I hear from speaking to people at Williams, he's highly rated. They respect him a lot. They know that he can do a job. And we saw when he went to Mercedes that he could, and often drivers don't get the opportunity to prove that. I think for Mick and Nikita, I guess what they've got to do this year is beat each other. I guess that's the clearest way of kind of showing how good you are. But also just get the team to talk positively about them. So, if there's people talk in Formula One, and if you both do a good job but are still coming 15th, 16th, people are still going to know that you're doing a good job and coming 15th, 16th. For Mick and Nikita, it's not really about scoring points this year. It's about settling into Formula One. They can do it in a less pressured environment. Mick, there's so much pressure, on his head because of, the Schumacher name and his father. And obviously for him, the challenge is he's got to make sure he beats Nikita, because if he doesn't, well, that might just be a point in his career that he might look back on and think that's where it all went wrong, and he doesn't get the opportunities with Ferrari.
We're seeing the drivers graduating younger and younger, and Lando was a teenager when he came up, for example, recently. And is that something now that Formula One not necessarily has a problem with, but these young drivers have so much expectation that if they're not delivering in those first couple of years, that it's really cutthroat, that there's going to be a 17-year-old who are there to take their place? Is that, I don't want to say a problem, but is that a big consideration?
You know what? I think it's always been difficult in Formula One to keep your seat. I think it's harder now because, like you said, you can get in from a much younger age. But Formula One, it shouldn't ever really be about someone keeping a seat warm. I think that these days, if you're a good driver and you're a strong driver, and hopefully you've been blooded in the right way and brought through in the right way, you should be able to show what potential you've got in a year or two. And I think it's unrealistic to expect that you need 4 or 5 years. But I think the way, for example, that Alex Albon's career went, they made it extra hard for him because he spent only half a season at Toro Rosso, which I think he needed a year or two in that junior team where he would have excelled, I think, and then he would have been ready to take that step at Red Bull. And I think we could say the same about Danny Kvyat.
Do you think it's something that Tsunoda and Deruvalo, who's in Formula 2, and Liam Lawson, Yuri Vips, list goes on, is that something that those Red Bull junior team drivers are going to be looking at and thinking, wow, this is maybe not where I want to be? Because if I was one of those drivers, I'll be looking at Alex Albon's season and seeing that, you know, it's in and out, and be kind of scared of getting promoted.
Yeah, but let's not forget that essentially when you start out in go-karting and you aspire to get into Formula One, you aspire to be in a car that can win. And a Red Bull is a car that can win races. And the Red Bull Junior program, as it's shown since its formation, gets you into a Red Bull seat. It does. You get opportunities. Okay, a few don't. You know, Carlos Sainz didn't quite work out for him, but look where he's got to. I think that, okay, it's probably going to be nerve-wracking, and there's probably an extra element of pressure. But if you're not in the Red Bull Junior program, you've slashed your chances of getting into Formula One anyway. So at the very least, at least the program gets you in there. But I think that the Red Bull Junior program is good. I think it's tough, and Helmut Marko is a tough taskmaster, but I think it's a good thing to have. And if you look at all of the driver programs, maybe aside from Ferrari, it's one of the ones that gives you the best opportunity to be in Formula One machinery, unless you've got financial backing.
So do you think at the moment with Formula One and the way the Formula One's moving in the future, that the only two ways to get into the sport will be being a pay driver or an academy driver?
Well, the idea of the cost cap really is to allow a team to function, ideally breaking even, well, at the minimum breaking even, ideally with a profit. And so if they can operate in that way, then there is no requirement really for them to take on a driver with significant backing. Let's not forget that many drivers on the grid bring money in some form. For example, Carlos Sainz is sponsored by a Spanish beer company. That sponsor has gone with him from McLaren to Ferrari, but that doesn't mean he's a paid driver. So I think that a team might be less inclined to go for a driver that brings significant money, like has done with Nikita Mazepin. But I think you're always going to get drivers bringing in some sort of financial benefit.
Talking about the driver academies as well, I talked just a second ago about the Red Bull junior team looking at how Red Bull work and, you know, any concerns around that. Do you think with Renault, or Alpine as I should say now, that that's something that those drivers might think, well, that's not right, when they see Fernando Alonso returning to the sport, when you've got Guanyu Zhou and Christian Lundgaard saying, hey, what about me?
It's hard, don't get me wrong, it's hard for those guys to see that happening, which is why I think, you know, if you're in that program or Red Bull, you've probably got a better chance of getting into a Formula One car if you're in the Red Bull program. But the Alpine program is great because they get a lot of time in a car. So they've run that 18 car a lot. And to get Formula One experience these days with limited testing is so important. And Zhou's had so much time now in that car that when he gets his shot, and, you know, of all of those young drivers, I think he's in a really good position to get one at Alpine if the circumstances are right. You feel for those guys who are in that program, and it's not entirely clear that when you get to the top of that program, where you go from there, if they are going to be taking a driver like Fernando Alonso. But that's not going to happen all the time. Like, how often is a two-time world champion with so much experience and who gets on so well with that team going to be available? You know, it's quite a unique set of circumstances.
You mentioned this, the cost cap, and how hopefully that's going to help. But do you think motorsport has a more deep-rooted problem because the cost cap's, of course, affecting the top level in Formula One, but it's still prohibitively expensive to even get it into British F4, for example? Is that something that you can think will trickle down somehow?
I think the nature of motorsport and competing in motorsport is that it's more expensive than other sports. You know, if you want to become a footballer or play tennis, you can go to your park probably and there'll be a pitch or, you know, some tennis courts. But to get into motorsport, you need some money to start with to pay for the fuel or the, you know, to rent a go-kart. I know that Formula One is obviously trying to It's quite keen to improve diversity and inclusion, and it's working on programs whereby it can give more people opportunities just to get in a go-kart to start with, to see if they like it. And if they like it, are they quick? It's kind of like we need to kind of follow the talent programs that a lot of Team GB Olympic programs run, whereby they if you're an athlete, Team GB rowing just said, come on down, get on a rowing machine and let's see what your numbers are like. And if your numbers are good, then, we'll start backing you. Don't get me wrong, that it requires funding and a significant setup, but that would be the way to do it, I think.
Do you think that's something that Formula One needs to be leading, or is that something that Formula One should be putting the onus on the teams to do, maybe as part of a cost cap? You get a little bit of extra time in the wind tunnel if you're investing $500,000 into grassroots stuff.
It needs everyone involved. It needs, Formula One, it needs the teams, it needs motorsport bodies in each individual country. But these kind of projects are not a work of a moment. You can't just say, right, we want to do this and tomorrow we're going to have it. It's going to take some time. And if you want to do it, you may as well do it properly. So I think it will take time. But I do think, especially in this new era of Formula One, where we've got the cost caps coming in, we kind of, COVID has kind of made everyone realize that we need to try and make the sport sustainable. And that's not just the survival of the sport, but as in its current form, but the long form, in the long term, and that includes bringing drivers through. I think there's a greater understanding and acceptance that everyone needs to play their part, and I do think that over the next few years, we are going to see everyone getting involved to try and find a way to make this sport sustainable.
Well, I hope so as well. I certainly hope so. And just to finish, I suppose, that you're mentioning that COVID changed everything and it changed the new regulations, which have been delayed. I know we've got minor regulation changes this year. So in Formula One, what do you find, or what are you expecting this year to excite you the most?
I'd like to think that Red Bull will use the stability in the regulations to start this year stronger. And then with a driver lineup where they've got two very strong drivers, they can offer a greater threat to Mercedes consistently and from the off. And I remember when I was previewing the season last year, and there was genuinely a school of thought that I supported that, the two Austria races in Hungary were Max Verstappen circuits. And, if things had gone right for him last year, he could have won all three, and he could have done it if things had gone right for him. And that would have changed the complexion of the championship fight. Mercedes and Lewis would have been on the back foot. I think Ferrari should really come back this year. If their engine chatter that, things have changed and they've made improvements, they should be closer, but they're not going to be. It's unrealistic to think they're going to be challenging Mercedes for the title. And then the other things to look forward to is the midfield, really. I think that, that battle for third, and what turned out to be third, McLaren, Aston Martin and Alpine, I think is going to be one to watch. I think it's going to be great. I think you've got some new drivers, some new lineups. It'll be interesting to see how Seb does at Aston. And it's a transitional year, but that doesn't mean it needs to be a dull year. And I think that there can be some, some great racetracks coming up. Return to the Netherlands. We could have a great season. So I'm really excited. I'm excited every year, but there's nothing that worries me this year about it being a dull one.
Well, that's a great message of hope to end things on. So, Lawrence, thank you so much for your time, and you obviously will be available on F1 TV, on the Formula One YouTube channel, and a Pad Hoc podcast. And yeah, well, hopefully we can catch up with you again at some point in the future, but really hope that you have a great year.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.